Okay, so in this tutorial, we are going to pick up where we left off with the other part. And we're going to basically just go ahead and we're going to be looking at how to add scratches using the curvature node. So instead of like redoing that whole network we've made and everything, we're just going to go ahead and copy and paste our material. And we're going to call the first one, let's just name the one we used previously. We'll call this curve color or something like that. And we'll call this curve scratch. Okay, so now I just need to figure out which one's which, right? I don't know if I have which one I have loaded on here right now because they're identical. So if I select this, it looks like this is the curve scratch, is the one that I already have on my material, so my object, so fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and double click and open this up. So let's go ahead and disconnect our color node. Right, we don't want any color information on there. We're just going to go back to old gray. And then what we're going to do is let's go ahead and just crank up our metalness on this object. And that already looks pretty dope and like science fiction-y. Just with like the dark gray. We could increase the lightness of this color a little bit. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll just boost it just a touch. And then let's take our roughness and we're going to go ahead and set it pretty low to start with, so it's a little bit more glossy. So you can see, right, we're kind of seeing the world around us at this point, which doesn't really exist, but right, that image that we used in the previous section. And there's a lot of stuff going on in here that's pretty intense visually, but we're not going to worry about that right now or resolving it. It's just all those internal reflections from all those bent surfaces back and forth on each other. And we're not too concerned about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and we could try using the color composite to start with, or we could try using the color layer. I think we might want to do the color layer just because it gives us a little bit more freedom in terms of what we're doing. But let's start with our curvature, and we're going to go ahead and solo this again. Right? And so the way I had it set up when we ended the tutorial, if you are just jumping in, is basically these were the settings. You can pause the video, you can redo those if you need to. But I'm going to boost things a little bit. To make it more obvious, what I want to do is I want this edge to be a little bit wider. So I'm going to pull my minimum down. Which one I'm going to pull down? Pull this one down? Now let's increase this. Let's dial our bias back down to like 50%. Let's see what that does for us. And maybe increase our gain to about 50%. Okay, so this is giving us like a much more subtle variation. Let's set our maximum up here back to 1. Let's see, that's really grayed out. What else is wrong here? Oh, I bet the output range is what's doing it all. There we go. Okay, so I basically reset everything to the default. So there's no need to do that thing I told you just to do just now. But if I go ahead and let's pull that down, let's pull this down a little bit. Because what I want is I want more brightness on these edges so that the scratches come through more clearly. And it may make sense to do this on like some other object too, but we're going to start with this landscape because we've already got it. Okay, so I'm going to be happy with the max there. I could decrease the gain some too, or increase the bias a little bit. Maybe I'll do that. Go ahead and mirror these settings. This is going to be pretty scratchy. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so that's going to be our mask, right? Anything that's white or gray is going to let scratches through. Anything that's black should not be scratched at all. Now that means there's going to be a lot of scratches to start with, which is great. It'll make it easy for us to see what's going on. So we do have this base color set here in our color layer. And we're currently using this as a mask. Let's go ahead and delete that. And you'll see that that's going to change our color output because we have this blend mode set to normal for layer 1, which means that the blue is just going to overlay the red. If I was to now go to say multiply, it's probably going to be like a purplish color or something. Yeah, it's like really dark purple. If I was to say add, we're going to get like a really vibrant purple, right? We're just going to say let's leave this at normal for now because we might use this color later, but we don't really need any color, right? We're just going to use whatever the base color is. So let's go ahead and move our color layer out of the way, get that out of there. And then I've gone ahead and disconnected the curvature from here. We're going to be using this again anyway, but we're going to be using color composite, not color layer. And we also need to create some scratches. So I'm going to go ahead and say, well, I know that I want the blend color to be this curvature object, so I'm going to connect that. But now what I need is I need this base color to not be red. Right? I need it to be scratches. So I'm going to go ahead and double click over here somewhere, and I'm going to type in TEX to get a texture. Double click on that, create my texture. Then I need to tell it where to look for that texture. Now I've already got my asset browser up, right? Again, you can just go to Window and then go down to Asset Browser and pull that up, or hit Shift F8. And then you just need to search for scratch. And the scratch that I'm using is this one here. I assume everybody has a kind of a similar layout in terms of what shows up where. And I'm going to go ahead and drop this into my path. And then at this point, what I want to do is I want to solo my texture because I want to see how big this is actually going to look on my surface. And that's not going to work out for us, right? So I'm going to go ahead and increase this to 5 and 5 and see what that looks like. Okay, that's a little bit better. It might honestly work really well. It might be really hard to see what's going on, but we're going to see if this works. And if it doesn't, we'll invert it and we might make some other changes. So what we're going to do now is we'll take our output color and we're going to make this the base color of our composite. And the composite, if you're coming in new, that composite's going to be set to, this is the blend mode as base color, which basically is just going to be showing us exactly the same thing, right? It's if I solo the color composite, we're getting exactly the same thing as the texture because all it's showing us is the base color. Now, when we're working with masking in this setting, rather than doing color layers and working with multiple colors and how those blend, we really want the black areas of our curvature to not be scratched in this case, and the white areas to be scratched, which means that we want to set our blend mode to multiply. Because what that means is basically the scratches are, this base color is only going to show through where we have white or grays, right? And that gray basically means it's somewhat transparent. So I'm going to switch to solo this so we can see this really quickly. And we'll just change our base color to multiply on our color composite node. And you will see that now we have, right, only really scratches showing up in those highlighted areas. So let's go ahead and take our output color and just drop this into our roughness. And once we've done that, let's go ahead and unsolo this. And so now you can see, and again, it's really subtle at this point because I think that we need to actually invert our image maybe or boost our color some. But if we go ahead and zoom in a touch on one of the edges of this mountain range, let's see if that gets a little bit closer, you can see that there are scratches and marks on the surface of this object. It's just not really that apparent right now. So there's a couple things we can do. One, we could select our texture node and we can increase the gamma a little bit here. And what that's going to do is it's basically going to add more contrast to our image. And so you can kind of see as that gets more contrasty, we're getting a little bit more detail there. But let's also go ahead and I think if we invert this, or if we switch maybe multiply, I don't think divide's going to do us any good, but we could try different blending modes and see if we get like something different that's actually useful. So I'm going to go ahead and, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And this is all going to depend on, right, how a lot of things. But you can see now I'm definitely getting more scratchiness on those areas that have curvature, right? Just by switching the blend mode a little bit, because in this case, right, divide is basically doing the opposite of multiply. So I could have added an invert node in here, a color invert node, or I can switch this blend mode. But you can see also, right, our texture is being stretched in all sorts of crazy ways here because of how steep these surfaces are. If we want to resolve that somewhat, there's one other node we can create, and we're going to go ahead and do that because it's really pretty awesome. It's a node called Triplanar. And so if I go ahead and type in try, and then search for Triplanar here at the very bottom, what Triplanar does is it allows you to input 3 image files, and it blends them together, and it projects them from the 3 different axes. So one projects in the X direction, one projects in the Y, one projects in the Z. This can be really useful, especially for things like scratches. So if I uncheck same image on each thing, you'll see that this default is this red, green, and blue, the sphere with red, green, and blue sides. If I solo this, let's see what it looks like. Right, you're going to see that it's this crazy mishmash of red, green, and blue. Right, the green being projected from the top, the blue being projected from this side, and the red being projected from this side. That means that we're going to have a lot less distortion on our images. And we only really need to have one image in this case. We're just using the same noise or the same scratches on all 3. So we're going to check same image on each. Now note that right now image X is basically a color that I can choose, right? And and I really need to be able to have this output so I can connect here. So I just want to right click on my triplanar, go to add input, inputs texture, and just image X. All right, and once I do this, I'm going to go ahead and connect this over here. And so now if you look at this, right, it looks kind of insane, but it's all the same on all of the different axes. So something else you'll notice, it's a lot tighter, like the copies seem to make a bigger difference. And you'll note that my scale on my preview here is really, really small, right? And we're going to go ahead and leave it there for the time being. And then we're just going to swap this out as the base color for our composite. And when we do that, let's go ahead and unsolo that texture. And I want you to note now whatever texture or noise or scratches, and in this case it doesn't necessarily look like scratches because they're kind of more dotty, which is odd. And it may just be the scale that I used and all of that. But you can see that now in this object I don't have those big long smears across the surface. Now, something to note, you still will get seams. There are, it's not a perfect situation. And you can see, right, there are hard seams here, but that's because of how I have this material overlaid. But this is actually a pretty good spot because there's edges here, right, that's one projection, and then there's 2 other surfaces that are being projected on in this current orientation. So one of the things we can do is we can adjust our blend amount, right? And the blend amount, if I was to, I wonder if I can just disable the texture for a time being. No, it doesn't look like I can. But so if, well, maybe if I uncheck same image, we can actually see this a little bit better. Let's see what we get, right? So you can kind of see here in our preview, we've got these, there's like a little bit of haziness between these edges, but if I increase my blend amount, as I go, you'll see what's happening in my surface. You can see that this plane is actually, right, kind of taking over from this other one, right? So I'm getting a little bit more blend amount, and then you'll note my blend curve is set to 2. If I drop this down, I'm going to get a much harder edge. If I boost this up, that curve should soften that transition zone between the 2 things. And so you can kind of see that starting to happen as I do this blend, right? So even though we're kind of like sillily blending these things, we can use this as a way, these 2 settings, to really blend this texture together. So if I check mark this back again, right? Now we've got like a smoother transition between these different things. Now there are still hard edges here, but that's because, right, of the way that we set up our curvature node. So if I go back to my curvature now, I can come over here and I can say, oh, okay, well, let's pull my max out a little bit. Let's see if we can get this to like, right, dial this down a little bit more, right? And you can see already, right, it's thinning out a little bit. My bias and gain, I could probably adjust a little bit here, right? Bring this back up about mid-range. Let's see here. I'm going to uncheck clamp. And I could probably pull this pivot up a touch and you'll see that, right, it's starting to shrink things down. Or if I actually drop my contrast down some, I should have more surface area that starts to fill in with some of these base colors, right? Oh, that's the wrong direction. And let's see if I boost this bias up, right, I'm going to get more and more. A little bit. Let's drop that down a little bit. Let's drop this down a touch, right? Or maybe boost this up a touch. And then, oh, maybe if I pull the minimum up. There we go. That's a little bit too much. But if I wanted some scratches on all the surface, right, or to fine-tune that blending, that's something that I can do, is I can potentially tweak that minimum a little bit. And so this is a way that, right, we can add scratches to the edges of our material. And let's go ahead and leave scratches on. And granted, I'd say you could probably do a much better job than this, than I've done already. We also are just doing this on the surface. We haven't added this to the bump channel or anything else. So maybe that's the next option, is to see if this color composite can just go into our bump channel. And if I select bump and go down to bump, it looks like that should be fine. Right? So now the bump channel's on, so we're actually getting a lot more texture on there. We're going to talk about displacement in another tutorial coming up, but in this case, right, this is kind of where we're at with this. So let's go ahead and maybe reconnect our color. And so, right, in this case, we're going to be using the same curvature, and we're just going to make this the mask for our color. And then let's go ahead and drop this into the color channel and see what we get here. And right, this is metallic, so it's going to look pretty metallic. We could also dial our metalness back down to 0. And then let's see here. Let's change the, if I go to this color layer, let's go ahead and change this from normal to I can't remember which one was like really kind of punchy and strong. Difference, maybe? No. Add? Well, maybe we can do add, and let's just make our color a lot brighter, so we have a little bit more visible difference on there. And then if we go ahead and zoom in a touch on some of the surface, let's see if it updates. Okay. So as this starts to continue, you can see, right, granted, I probably have far too much scratch going on here in terms of the surface, but you can see that I've got this thinning material and I've got scratches on the surface of my object that are not uniform across that surface, even though they are actually, with the triplanar, accurate in terms of scale to each other. So this is something where you can continue to experiment with this and push it. You can add these things to many different channels on your material. You know, this could easily, something in here could be added to emission. So if I wanted to come down here and say, oh, let's add some emission to this. And if I was to say, let's add an input and go to base properties and emission and color, we could potentially, right, use the same composite to, if I zoom in here a little bit now, right, we could add this to our emission color. And then we need to just add some weight to that emission. And it's going to be white, right? But you can see right now we've got these scratches that are only in certain highlighted areas that are emissive. If I was to turn my light off, and then in my render settings, if I go to my render settings and redshift, and I go to redshift here, and then I have to go to the advanced tab, which is kind of silly to me, but whatever, and I go to globals, there is this option for the default light. If I turn that off, then the only light source in the scene should be the actual emissive material itself. And it seems like there's a, okay, I think it updated now. I was like, there's a lot of light coming out of this for, for this to be a very fine detailed thing. But we do have this emissiveness, right? Honestly, that looks kind of very strange. Looks like speckling on some other material, but yeah. So you can see that we can get a really, remarkably more interesting result with these materials by just using curvature and using the triplanar to give us that ability to have uniform texture across a very warped surface.